So one of the things I was really pleased to hear is that you were sharing all the examples of your, what you called not so good designs. But this is the beauty of design, and it's so free. And there's so much freedom in actually being able to design, because you have the freedom to iterate again and again and again and again until you get it right. And this is really important when we're using design to solve complex problems, because we're not going to solve it for the, in the first go, for sure. So just having that freedom to be able to experiment and having the freedom to fail is absolutely crucial. So I think we move straight to the next speaker and then hold on to your questions, because we will have plenty of time to ask. But the next fellow is Jonathan Zong. He's a computer scientist and now on his 5th year of his PhD over at MIT CSAIL, where he's working with the Visualization Group. So not only have you been recognized as a mad fellow, completely mad fellow, but also recognized as by the Soros Fellowship and Forbes 30 Under 30. So he's joined today with his advisor, which is, now I have to try to say your name. I've been practicing, but we will see how it goes. So his advisor is Professor Arvind Satyanarayan. Satyanarayan? Would you try to say that? My name is really tough to say, but I think this one is too. But anyway, he is associate professor at the visualization and leads the visualization group at the MIT CSAIL. And before I say anything more wrong, please welcome Jonathan to the stage.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction, Svafa. As she mentioned, my name is Jonathan, and I'm excited to share my work today on designing accessible data visualizations for blind and low vision users. So according to a survey by the National Federation of the Blind, 7 million people in the United States have a visual disability. And for many of these people, and for more globally, 96.8% of the top 1 million pages on the internet are simply not accessible to the screen reader assistive technology that they use almost every day. And if you're not familiar with how screen readers work, I'm going to kick it over to my past self to explain what they are.
So if you're not familiar with how screen readers work, there's essentially a cursor, which will be represented here in a second visually using a black outline. And the user can use keyboard shortcuts to move this cursor around the page, and whatever's selected by the cursor will be read out as text-to-speech. So here I can demonstrate what the accessible HTML version of our paper looks like to a screen reader.
Visit link heading level 1. Hi, we're the MIT Visualization Group. Visit link home middle dot link middle dot link heading level 1. Which screen reader experiences for accessible data visualization? Link best paper honorable mention article. You are currently on an article inside of web content. Heading level 2 items. Abstract. Current web accessibility guidelines ask visualization designers to support screen readers via basic non-visual alternatives like textual description.
So that's kind of the experience of the internet that you can expect if you're using a screen reader. But often when you're dealing with image content, if the authors of the web page haven't provided an alternative text description of the image, your experience will look more like this.
Image. One face. Image. Logo other. Image.
Right. So in the work that I've been doing with the visualization group and as a Mad Fellow this year, I've been kind of thinking about this question of how do we make charts, which are a particular kind of image content, more accessible to screen reader users. And there's a couple reasons why this is kind of a challenging and an interesting design question, right? Because this is essentially a question of cross-sensory translation. Visualizations and text descriptions kind of just work differently. Charts have these various visual features that, as a reader, you can kind of shift your attention around the chart, look at high-level patterns, look at individual data points, and you can kind of do this on the fly. But if you're using a screen reader, the text description kind of imposes a linear predefined reading order. So you're kind of, you're kind of beholden to the decisions that the person who wrote the text made about what information was important to include. And so if we kind of walk through an example of what current best practices for making charts accessible look like using this example election map from that video earlier, there's kind of two main approaches. The first is alt text. So if someone were to kind of provide an alternate textual description of that map, it might look like something like this. Map of 2020 US presidential election results. Joe Biden has 227 electoral votes. Donald Trump has 213 electoral votes. 98 votes remain. So alt text has some strengths and some limitations, right? One great thing about alt text is that it gives you a high-level overview of the data pretty efficiently. After listening to that couple of sentences, I kind of know what the general takeaway of the map is. But on the flip side, there's no way to do self-guided data exploration. So if I know the amount of votes that Joe Biden has, but I want to know, how many of those votes came from each state, if that information is not included in the sentence, then there's no way to find out. The other way that people make charts accessible on the internet is by including a data table of the underlying data that the chart is representing. And data tables kind of address this limitation of alt text, right? They enable detailed exploration that you can kind of do in a self-guided manner. You can use your screen reader to move around the different parts of the table as you please. But with data tables, it's very tedious and time-consuming to build a mental picture of what's going on with the data. If you're reading individual data rows one by one, there's a lot that you have to remember in order to understand higher-level patterns. So to kind of address the limitations of these existing practices, our group at MIT Viz has been developing Ollie, which is an open source JavaScript library for converting data visualizations on the internet into keyboard navigable textual descriptions that both allow you to get high-level overviews in the form of text and also navigate around varying levels of detail and do self-guided exploration. And this is something that's open source and people can use it today. So here's a demo video of how Ollie works. And pay attention to how we are kind of moving between text descriptions at varying levels of detail. So here on the screen, we have a scatter plot showing data about different species of penguins. And we have the corresponding Ollie output, which is a keyboard navigable text structure with descriptions at different levels of detail. So let's say I'm using a screen reader and I come across this chart while I'm navigating a web page. If I read out the top-level Ollie description, I'll get some information about what kind of chart this is.
A scatter plot showing body mass and flipper lengths of penguins. A scatter plot with axis flipper length, and body mass, g, dot.
Now, if I want to explore this chart further, I can press the down arrow key to go down a level of detail in the Ollie structure. And on that next level, I'll receive descriptions of the different axes and legends of the chart.
X-axis titled flipper length, for a quantitative scale with values from 170 to 230.
And now that I'm on this level, I can press the left and right arrow keys to go through the different descriptions on this level.
Y-axis titled body mass, G, for a quantitative scale with values from 3,000 to 6,000. Legend titled species for color with 3 values starting with Adderley and ending with Chin 2.
Now let's say I want to explore the chart along the x-axis. I can navigate back to the x-axis node and press down again to get information about the intervals along the x-axis.
Y-axis titled, x-axis titled flipper length.
And now pressing the left and right arrow keys, I can move along the different intervals.
170 to 180, 8 values. 180 to 190, 69 values. 190 to 200, 113 values.
And by moving along these intervals and getting information about how much data is contained within each interval, I'm kind of building an understanding of how the data is distributed along this axis. Now let's say I'm interested in that interval between 170 and 180. I can go back to that node and press the down arrow again to access a table of the individual data points.
108, 170 to 180, 8 value. Table with 8 rows, table.
And from here, I can use built-in screen reader keyboard commands to navigate this table and read out individual data points. So how is Ollie different from prior best practices, right? We kind of prioritize these design goals of enabling open-ended, self-guided exploration where screen reader users can control their position within this hierarchy at their own pace, and also providing descriptions at varied levels of detail. So if a high-level description isn't enough information for you. You can kind of dive in deeper and get more specific about the data. Now, to kind of preview what's next in this work, and this is work that I've been doing for this past spring that I haven't shown publicly yet, we've been kind of thinking about this question of multi-sensory data representations. So currently, accessibility approaches are very vision-centric, right? Here we started with a chart and kind of converted it into a text description, and we're still thinking about these two things as very independent entities. But what if we think about using all these different modalities together in one system? So here's a demo of a version of Ollie that's kind of more integrated with the visualization so that blind data analysts and their sighted collaborators can have a common point of reference. And as I navigate the structure here, you'll see that the visualization updates to show where the screen reader is focused.
A multi-series line chart showing stock prices of 5 tech companies over time. 1 of 5. Line titled MSFT with axes. 2 of 5. Line titled AMZN with axes date and price. 3 of 5. Line titled IBM with axes. 4 of 5. Line titled Goop with axes date and price. 5 of 5. Line titled AAPL with axes date and price.
And then we can integrate other forms of sensory modalities with their own pros and cons, like data sonification, which is very good for giving a gist of large amounts of data very quickly, but can't really tell you about individual data values. Also, that's just fun to listen to. And we can't escape talking about ChatGPT when we're talking about textual content. We've also been kind of exploring methods where we query GPT to offer us kind of additional analysis of the data that's kind of situated in the hierarchy. So I'll give an example of that here.
4 of 5, 3 of 5, 2 of 5. Line titled AMZN with axes. 1 of 2. X-axis title date with values. 1 of 8. From 1998 to 2000. 2 values. Amazon. AMZN. Started the year 2000 with a stock price of $64.56, which rose to $68.87 by February 1st, reflecting the company's growth and potential for success in the tech industry. However, the dot-com bubble burst in March 2000, causing a significant decline in stock prices for many tech companies, including Amazon.
And so what I find really interesting about that is that this information can incorporate not just information that's in the data, but information that accounts for things like current events and social context. And that can just provide another avenue for helping people through analysis. So I've highlighted here a couple of interesting outputs that are situated in that Amazon section of the Ollie hierarchy. So the model is providing information about things like product launches and entering into new markets to kind of contextualize the data that you're looking at. And it kind of knows about events like the global financial crisis in 2008 and offers that as a hypothesis for why your data is the way that it is. And doing this situated in the Ollie structure means that rather than kind of relying on it to summarize your entire data set, you can kind of use it to understand targeted subsets of your data and also verify its claims against the data that you already have on hand. So I just want to thank my enormous list of collaborators. A special shout out to Daniel Hesh, who's a blind researcher based at the Global Disability Innovation Hub in London, who's been an important co-design and research partner. And also my two current master's and undergrad advisees, Shuli Jones and Isabella Pedraza-Paneros. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the conversations today.
Great, that was really awesome. Even though I've seen the work sort of day to day, week to week, it's just nice to see it sort of come together and hear you tell the story of it versus the story that I tell. And I was just thinking about, particularly the way you were introduced as a computer scientist. And I'm curious, if I can prompt you to sort of reflect on, I think the computer science bit of your identity is only part of what makes you such an effective designer. And I'm curious about, the path that led you towards working on accessibility and how maybe it's, prompting you to draw on other parts of your sort of skill set.
Yeah, thank you, Arvind. I guess coming out of undergrad, I did undergrad at Princeton where I studied computer science and visual arts with a focus in graphic design. And I think I kind of stumbled into data visualization just because it seemed like a natural intersection of those two things. And within computer science, like my undergrad thesis was kind of around like the ethics of data collection and designing systems to kind of support people in, saying no to researchers who want to collect their data. And I think there's kind of a few like through lines from that work that I've tried to kind of bring into the accessibility work. One is, the idea of, designing systems that support people's autonomy and agency, and, making software flexible enough to kind of allow people to express their preferences and their values. And I think another is just like the idea of design as something that can help us, answer or at least make progress on like really tough kind of social and ethical questions. In the ethics work, that kind of looks like drawing from ideas in feminist philosophy to kind of understand how we should like interpret the way that users interact with a system that's designed around them kind of saying no to powerful actors. I think in the accessibility work, it's kind of thinking about broader conversations in like disability studies about how there's no such thing as one-size-fits-all solutions, and kind of really taking that to heart when we design software.
Oh, I love it, because you set me up for my next question, which was, so riffing on that one-size-fits-all, I was kind of curious. There's this notion in accessibility, which I think I know you're familiar with, but called a curb cut effect, where something that was designed for accessibility purposes ends up having sort of a larger impact and benefit for everyone. And I'm curious whether you're seeing some of that emerge in some of your work, whether it's in the specific things you showed us today or in some of your thinking around sort of the ethical implications of this, user agency and autonomy and things like that.
Absolutely, yeah. One thing that we've discussed a lot amongst our collaborators is the idea that, for accessible representations, like textual representations of data, why even refer to the visualization, right? Why do like blind users need to know that there's an X and a Y axis? And I think part of that is just that we're all kind of situated in our like social and relational context, right? Blind folks have sighted friends and they want to talk to them about the data that they're looking at. And so it's important to kind of create those common reference points, even as we're kind of translating the like modality that people access this information through. And so, with the work that I was showing at the end, we're really thinking about kind of facilitating collaboration between, blind and sighted users in a way that benefits everybody, because having access to those multiple modalities just gives you more options for kind of understanding and analyzing your data. And something that we've talked about a lot too is like there's kind of increasing momentum around accessibility in data visualization right now, and kind of increasing recognition that this is an important issue. And I think part of what we're trying to show with our work is that it's both important because it's socially important, but it's also just like a very interesting and intellectually rich area for design. And there's all these kind of questions about like, what are the different kind of relative strengths of these different sensory modalities that will then kind of feed back into like creating better data visualizations.
Yeah, I really love that point, that it's not only sort of the morally right thing to do, but it's just like intellectually deep and interesting, and these two things don't have to sort of be mutually exclusive. And so I was curious about what that means in the context, of that really sort of provocative demo that we ended on of sort of, the GPT doing the data analysis. I don't even know if that's the right way to describe it, right? Doing the data analysis for us or doing the interpretation for us. And so I'm curious for your, I know that it's a very early prototype, right? But I'm curious already, what are kind of some of your hunches and what the sort of balance we might want to achieve there might be?
Absolutely. I went back and forth a lot on the title for that slide and how to describe what was happening. I think something that's come up a lot in our conversations with blind and low vision users is just that idea of agency and who is in charge of doing the interpreting. When one of my colleagues, Alan, kind of tested a lot of different kinds of textual descriptions with folks, we realized that for sighted people really like descriptions that do a lot of kind of interpretation and analysis and give you the high level takeaway, because we can look at the chart and do the kind of low level numbers accessing stuff relatively quickly. But for blind and low vision users, they actually didn't like those kind of too interprety descriptions because they felt like it was kind of taking away their ability to draw their own conclusions first, right, by engaging directly with the data themselves. So with something like using GPT to offer these additional descriptions, I really think that we should be thinking of these more as kind of hypothesis generation exercises rather than asking for the answer. And part of that is like John and Maria were saying, GPT gets it wrong, more frequently than we would like it to. And there's other work in our lab kind of thinking about the ways in which it gets it wrong. But I think, kind of like I was trying to articulate in the demo, situating that additional information within the data structure where you can kind of hear that description, but then go back and do the analysis yourself and kind of decide whether or not you agree that the global financial crisis actually caused this dip in the data, is powerful to kind of leave in the user's hands.
Great, and I think we're out of time.
I think
Awesome,
you're out of
thanks
time.
a lot, Jonathan.
This is fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And this is a fantastic example of how talent kind of transcends disciplines in what you can do. Designer turned computer scientist or vice versa, and now solution designer.